It was a late autumn evening, and I was driving home after a long work trip. The sky was already dark, and the roads were emptier than usual. The soft hum of my car engine was the only sound accompanying me as I navigated through the countryside. I was exhausted, just a couple of hours away from home. I wanted nothing more than to fall into my bed. The highway was backed up due to construction, and my GPS suggested an alternative route through some rural backroads. I didn't think twice about it. I'd been driving for hours and wanted to avoid the delay. The new route shaved off 30 minutes from my ETA, so I followed the directions. At first, it seemed normal enough. The road was narrow, and the trees on either side were so thick that they formed a tunnel of branches overhead. The leaves had turned shades of gold and crimson, but in the dim glow of my headlights, everything looked shadowed and eerie. My GPS kept instructing me to turn deeper into these roads, taking me farther away from the familiar highways. After about 20 minutes, the road began to change. The asphalt grew rough, cracked, and uneven. It hadn't been maintained in years, and I was starting to feel uneasy. I checked my GPS, but it showed that I was still on course. Then, something strange happened. My signal dropped. The GPS screen froze, then blinked off. I was alone with no map and no sense of direction. The trees seemed to crowd closer to the road, their branches now scraping against my car as I crawled forward. I slowed down, wondering if I should turn back, but when I looked behind me, the road had vanished into the darkness. There were no lights, no signs, nothing but endless trees. My gut told me to stop, but my fear pushed me forward. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, silhouetted in the dim light. I could make out the shape of a man, but something was wrong. His limbs were too long, too thin. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and I could swear he was staring directly at me. My instincts screamed at me to reverse, to get away, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. The figure began to walk towards me, slow, deliberate steps. I fumbled to put the car into reverse, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. As I backed up, the figure stopped and vanished into the trees without a sound. My breath came in short gasps as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe it was just someone messing with me, I thought, trying to calm myself. But then, I saw something else, a second figure. This one was closer, standing just off the side of the road, watching me. As my headlights passed over it, I realized it wasn't a person at all. Its face was pale, featureless, almost like it had been stretched tight over a skull. It didn't have eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. I floored the gas pedal. The road twisted and turned, and the further I drove, the more figures I saw. Some stood by the trees, others crouched on the side of the road, their heads following my car as I sped past. Every time I looked in my mirrors, I could see them emerging from the shadows, moving silently through the forest. I couldn't tell if they were human or something else entirely. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, forcing myself to keep going. The road seemed endless. My car's clock blinked, stuck at 12 a.m., though I knew it had been hours. I was in some kind of loop, trapped in this nightmare route with no way out. The figures kept appearing, closer and closer each time, their twisted forms bending unnaturally. Finally, up ahead, I saw a dim light. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as I approached. It was a small house, its windows dark and lifeless, but the porch light was on. My GPS suddenly blinked back to life, announcing that I had reached my destination. But this wasn't home. This wasn't anywhere I recognized. Before I could react, my car sputtered and died, the engine completely shutting off. The lights flickered, and I sat in total darkness. My phone was dead. Everything was dead. I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. They were coming from all directions, surrounding me. I couldn't see them, but I knew the figures from the woods were here. And then, a tap on the window. I turned, trembling, to see a face pressed against the glass. It was one of them, white, featureless, smiling. The last thing I heard was the soft voice of my GPS. Recalculating. I barely survived that night. How I got back home, I can't remember. My car was found miles away from the nearest road, abandoned in a ditch, engine dead. No one believes me when I tell them what happened. But I'll never trust my GPS again. Not after what it led me to. It's been 3 months since that night, and I've tried to move on. I've told myself it was all just a hallucination, a product of exhaustion and stress. But every now and then, I catch myself glancing at the clock at midnight, feeling that creeping dread. It hasn't let go of me. The nightmares started a few days after I returned home. In my dreams, I'm always back on that road, driving endlessly, with those figures watching me from the trees. Their pale, featureless faces pressed up against the glass, their thin limbs stretching toward my car. The worst part is that sometimes, I can hear the voice of my GPS echoing in the background, calmly telling me to recalculate, leading me back to that place. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I got home and collapsed onto my couch. My phone buzzed with a notification, a software update for my GPS app. The same one I had used that night. My stomach dropped. I hadn't opened that app since the incident, too afraid of what I might find. But curiosity got the better of me. With shaky hands, I tapped the notification. The app opened, its familiar interface loading smoothly, but something was off. The screen flickered, glitching for a brief second. And then, it happened. A single message appeared. You forgot something. Return to your destination. I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be happening? Was it a glitch? A sick joke? I tried closing the app, but it wouldn't respond. The message stayed there, haunting me. And then, the screen went black. For a moment, I sat frozen in my living room, my phone dead in my hand. But just as I was about to put it down, the screen flickered back on, and the GPS map appeared. A route was already plotted out. The destination was marked with no name, just the same coordinates that had led me into the nightmare woods that night. And underneath the route, another message, time to come back. I turned off my phone and threw it across the room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was just tired. But when I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a soft, familiar voice echoed in my mind, recalculating. Over the next few days, things escalated. I began receiving strange calls in the middle of the night. The caller ID always showed unknown, but when I picked up, there was only silence on the other end. Sometimes, I could hear faint footsteps or the crackling of static, like something trying to reach me through the phone. The figures from the road weren't just in my dreams anymore. At night, when I glanced out of my bedroom window, I swore I could see shapes moving in the dark. They were distant at first, shadowy outlines just beyond the streetlights. But each night, they seemed to get a little closer. My neighbors told me I was imagining things. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost my mind. But deep down, I knew. They were coming for me. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I had been dreaming of that road again, only this time, I didn't drive away. In the dream, I got out of the car. And they took me. When I awoke, my phone was buzzing on my nightstand. Groggy and confused, I picked it up. Another message from the GPS app, tonight. I was shaking, but I had to know. I opened the app, and once again, the route was plotted. This time, it was different. It was shorter, closer. The destination was just a few miles away, deep in the woods near my town. I hadn't driven that way in years. And yet, the app insisted. Take the alternate route. Something inside me broke. I couldn't live like this anymore. If they wanted me to return, maybe the only way to end this nightmare was to face whatever was waiting for me. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and headed to my car. The drive was eerily quiet. No cars, no wind, just the soft purr of my engine and the relentless voice of the GPS guiding me deeper into the forest. The road became familiar, the trees looming closer, their gnarled branches stretching out like claws. It was happening again. As I turned a corner, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. My blood ran cold. It was one of them. Tall, unnaturally thin, with that grotesque, featureless face staring blankly at me. But this time, I didn't stop. I couldn't. I floored the accelerator, speeding past it, but my heart sank as I realized there were more. They were everywhere, lining the road, creeping out of the woods, their white faces reflecting the light as I sped by. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white with fear. The GPS chimed again. You have arrived. I slammed on the brakes. The small house stood in front of me, its windows dark, just like before. The porch light flickered on, casting an eerie glow. My car engine sputtered and died, just as it had the last time. I knew there was no escaping this. I got out of the car, my legs trembling as I approached the house. I don't know why, but something pulled me toward it, a force I couldn't resist. The door creaked open as I stepped onto the porch. The air inside was cold, damp, and thick with a musty smell. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. That's when I heard it, the soft, mechanical voice of the GPS, now coming from inside the house. Welcome back. I never made it out of that house. If you find this message, if you're reading my words, remember this: never trust your GPS when it takes you on an alternative route. They're waiting for you too.